People sometimes ask me, right? Like, yo, D-boy, what did you play back in the days? Like before you played Bruce, because now you play Bruce, right? So before that, what did you play? What was your main clan? Well, if you know me, you know I'm a big Spike Brother fan. But you also know that I have been playing Spike Brothers from the start, even before it was a complete deck. And that was from set 1, right? Because from set 1 we could not make a complete Spike Brother deck until BT2 came out, which is the very second set of all time, because Vanguard started with 2 trial decks, and then after that we got a few sets, or lots of sets. And then Vanguard started, and you had General Siegfried as your first ever boss monster for Spike Brothers. Of course, you also had the Juggernaut that came in set 1, and you also had the Skydiver that came in set 2. But because they were only Regards, as in their skills, we had to wait to General Siegfried, which was in the same set, to make a good, strong, competitive deck. And then with time, we had more and more, and one of the cards that made a big difference was, of course, the one and only a card that will always be down in history, as in the changes that it made to the clan, that you finally could call from the deck. Some people like it, some people are angry about it, but mostly people love it. And that's, of course, Deadly Emperor. Deadly Emperor was the first limit breaker for Spike Brothers, and it was the card basically that made the biggest change, if you ask me, when it came to the clan, on finally being able to call from the deck, right? And then after that, things also changed when we have had the break ride, because the break ride is yet another card that is so insanely good that also made things different. Um, with the break ride, you kind of gain the power, and also it was easier to get your units back to your deck without you having to have units on the field that could only get back by their own skill. Like for an example, with Spike Brothers, you need cards like Juggernaut Maximum, or Bracky, or Reckless Express, or Devil Dome, or cards like those to go back to the deck, to leave an empty Reguard circle behind them, because most cards could only call to an empty Reguard circles, right? The same goes for Siegfried, which was how Spike Brothers actually started. And with Bad and Dragger, he helped putting those units back. So that was something that we really liked about the card. And then after that, we came to the Legion era. And the Legion era, we had different legions. We have 3 for Spikes, but the one that was the strongest or the most competitive was the Ogles, Bloody Ogle and Frozen Ogle. So this was the history of Spike before the G era, right? When the G era started, we had Rising, and then things changed. But before that, if you go to the origin of Spikes, these are, in my opinion, the most used and the most competitive boss monsters of their era. The old days, the limit break, the break ride, the Legion with the break ride. So this card could be used in both decks, or you could make a deck with a big welcome to you all to our channel. We are Team Crushing the Meta. Today I'm here with D-Boy, and we will do a series of videos that we will talk about each era of Vanguard a little bit, and we will talk about the Spike Brother deck in that era. I could also even do a deck profile for you guys for each of these decks, as I even have them in their favorite sleeves, let's say. So these decks are ready, and these decks are very fun to play. It was the idea of Chris Flores Blazing Paladin, which is the co-creator of Crushing the Meta, to make a deck of each clan from the old days. And we talking very old, or we talking Limit Break, or a little bit of Limit Break and Break Right. I think he also made some Legion decks, but not too much. So basically, you have enough boss monsters to choose from, but it's very hard. The project is very hard to keep every clan almost at the same level, so you could pick up whatever deck you want and you would still have a fair chance to play in that game. For me, it's of course very nice to pick up the binders and then look at the old decks and make them, rebuild them, especially now because you have more cards to work with. The rules are very simple. You could use cards from with no V, of course, and no D, but you could use cards from whatever era you want to build the right deck. So if you build this deck, of course, you could not use Limit Break, Break Right, which is also Limit Break, or Legion. You could not use those, but you could only focus on old cards. But if you have a card, let's say for an example, that came in way later, like Dudley Mason, you could still use Dudley Mason because the card does not require you to have a Limit Break or a Legion to work. So that's basically the reason why you could still build these decks differently than they were in the old days. Because if you only build it the same way they were, then it's less fun. Also, the difference is that Spike Wars didn't really have that much cards, so it's nice to have cards now that you could use that you could not in the old days. In this video, we'll not zoom in on each and every deck, but we will talk about them in their respective era and how they did back in the days. For an example, if we start with the first one, which is the General Siegfried one, of course, Spike Brothers were pretty much known for their Juggernaut Maximum and their Skydiver. These were the cards that struck fear into your opponent's eyes, and until way later that we caught cards like Machine Gun Gloria that could actually help with this deck. The same goes for cards like Dudley Mason, which could make the deck more offensive in the early games and make it even more deadly, and not Dudley. That was an inside joke there, if you know spikes. So the Juggernaut Maximum, if you don't know his skill, pretty much very easy. He is a Lord, so if you don't have a Spike with a unit on the field, he loses 2k, which makes him a 9k Vanguard, but he was an 11k unit, which we do not have that much in the early games. Like one of the units that was used in lots of decks was cards like Dragonic Overlord, because he was an 11k, right, and he had that skill. The same goes for the Juggernaut Maximum and the Skydiver. They were 11ks, which sometimes even the Spike with the player would ride into any of these, because the 11k made a big difference back in the days, because most of your grade 2s had a 10k or in 9k base, which means that they could not hit the Vanguard. They need a booster. And most of the boosters back in the day were 7k or 6ks. Most of them were 6ks that had a skill that you wanted to use. And being a 6k boosting a 9k, because the 10ks were the grade 2s that did not have a skill, you'll make a 15k column. And a 15k column will not hit the 11s that well, but it would still hit the 10s that well. Remember that the triggers back in the days were only 5k. They give 5k. Which means that if your opponent gets a trigger and they are 10k, they will be 15, and your 15 columns will still hit. and getting a card out of your opponent's hand back in the days was just really, really, really good. So it worked very, very, very differently than it works right now. But again, it was a very, 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 very fun of Vanguard time that we played back in the days. Then we come to the Demonic Lord Deadly Emperor. In this era, we had two Vanguards that we could use from, Graceful Catapult or Deadly Emperor. A Graceful Catapult was a good card, but it has a weakness, and the weakness was that you need to have another copy of Catapult into your hand. There was no consistent way to get it to the hand. If you look at other decks that did have that, the Graceful Catapult did not. So for that reason, you had to hard draw into it to play lots of draw triggers, which you already did. And it was good, but not as good, if you ask me. And when it comes to this deck, the deck was very, very, very strong because you could have the first waves of attacks, right? With your maximums and your skydivers and whatever units you want to have on the field. And then after that, when he attacks, count +2, you put 2 cards from your hand into your soul, what most of the time were grade 3s that you will not use because there is no reason to write the Emperor on the top of an Emperor, except if you want to create soul. So you could put the Emperors or draw triggers because you also had lots of draw triggers in the deck. You play 6 or 8, up to you. And then you will be able to call 2 cards out of your deck. The cards that you call could be also special interceptors, like the interceptor that get +5k. It could be more attackers. You could do different things when it came to this deck. And looking at the deck list, like you have so many different cards that are in this deck that are quite amazing that you played. Now, one of the cards that we got later on that could add a Limit Breaker to your hand, that add more consistency to the deck, was Heat Element Blah. This card, if we had this in the time that we had Graceful Catapult, maybe we would use Catapult more, but still, in my opinion, the Deadly Emperor is better because it's just easier to get off. Of course, the Graceful Catapult only loses that card, but on the other hand, he also adds the cards to the soul, while the other one discarded it. So there's like a different way for both to work, and that's one of the things that made the two decks lots of fun to use, and also to like switch around on which one you like more. But for me, Deadly Emperor was the one. And then we got into the Bad and Dragger, and then a whole new era of Vanguard started when we got the Break Rides. The Break Rides made things interesting. Riding a Limit Breaker on top of the Break Ride, riding an old unit on top of the Break Ride, you could make a really, really nice combinations. The same when we got the GRI and you had strides, like you could choose. And this one, building a deck, was quite interesting. You could add low break enablers to the deck. There were great ones that were 7k and all of them had the same skill, which is they pretty much enable your limit break. So like for an example, for Spike Brothers, it was Cheer Girl Elsa. Elsa, pretty much having her on the field, it gets just the continuous ability to your Vanguard that his limit break is active even if you do not have 4 damage, because limit break will only active if you have 4 damage, which is something that we did not have in the old days. In the old days, we had different skills like the special Persona Blast or the Omega Persona Blast, like when you have to Soul Blast 5 or 7 and Counter Blast 5 to have a skill. But some skills were insane, so understandable that the cost was that high. So the Bad and Dragger was the break ride for Spike Brothers. And arguably, I could argue with lots of people that this is the best break ride in the game, while some people would say maybe the one from Dimension Police is. pretty much up to you. You could think whatever you want, but for me, this will always be the best break ride in the game. And people will be like, D-Boy, why do you think? Well, it's not, I think, it's just how insanely strong the card is. What the card does is basically whenever a Vanguard attacks, it gets plus 10k. At the end of the battle, it goes to the bottom of your deck. And that's it. So it clears an empty Vanguard circle behind it, but also it gives it 10k. And with a deck that could attack like 4 times with a Vanguard, that would mean an extra 40k. But also it makes it easier to have those empty Vanguard circles, which is the reason why Bad and Dragger, even when the Strides came, it's still a card that you play. It's still, even nowadays, a card that you could play. I think the only break rate in the game that a deck or a clan would play is Bad and Dragger if you go to Spike Brothers Premium. So, yeah, that was insane. And then what made it even more insane is having cards like Bloody Ogle, where your attacking combo started to be more than those 5 attacks. You could do 7, you could do 8 attacks, depending on how much counterblast and how much Ogles you still have or you have in your hand. But you could juggle and recharge your counterblasters with recalling and stuff, and this was just insane. So yeah, the 10k made a big difference in making those attacks. Alright, that's pretty much it about when we talk about each and every era of Spike Brothers before the G era coming, because with G era we will make even more decks that you guys will be amazed on the power of Spike Brothers, and also the way that the deck changed from being a rush deck to a control deck to more like a turbo deck, because Spike also became a turbo GBA deck when it comes to the G era. And I think in the G era you could build like 3 or 4 very different decks from different timelines, and that's also something that makes Cardfight Vanguard amazing, because with time we changed the deck around. With the come of Crane Elementals, we made some changes as well, because Spike Brothers didn't get that much support, so the Crane Elementals were something that was a blast for Spike Brothers. Like the tier, it made a huge difference for countercharging during your big turns. Alright, thank you for watching, thank you for tuning in our channel. I would like to hear from you guys if you guys want to see these decks as in a profile, and also I would like you guys to tell me if you want to see these decks in action as well, because when Chris Flores, Blazing Paladin will be in town, we will make some interesting videos on how these decks will play against the different clans that he made, or different decks and clans that he made. Alright, thank you guys for watching, and thank you for tuning in on our channel. I hope that we will see you in the next video. So till next time.